aura on the markets. But let's move on now. The chip shortage issue continued to hit a lot of passenger vehicle makers in the month of November, Maruti specifically, as domestic sales were quite weak, lower production, rural demand continues to be weak across the board. Shashank Srivastava, the Executive Director of Marketing and Sales at Maruti Suzuki, joins us now to talk about that. Mr. Srivastava, good morning and thanks so much for joining us. You know, I was looking at the domestic sales particularly in the month of November. It's fallen 19% compared to same time last year.
Correct.
Any recovery that you've seen so far towards the end of this calendar year, and what are the demand trends looking like at the moment?
So if you look at the demand side parameters, they seem to be pretty strong. By the demand side parameters, I mean the inquiry levels, the bookings, and so on. But on the retail side, there has been weakness largely because of availability of stock. So if you see that this is not just Maruti Suzuki's problem, largely because of the semiconductor issue, it's affecting almost all OEMs across the board. And in fact, if you look at November sales overall for the industry, about 247,000 against 287,000 last year in November. That's a drop of about 15 percentage points. So it's across the industry. And on your question of when is it likely or is it getting better? Yes, it is getting better. In September, if you recall, we produced just 40% of our planned production. In October, it's about 60%. In November, about 82-83%. And in December, we are expecting about 80-85%. So it seems to be getting better. But then I'm very apprehensive to give an exact date when it will normalize, because the global supply chains are involved. And it's not just India, but OEMs across the world are impacted by this semiconductor shortage.
Just one follow-up there, since you're talking about global supply chains. You know, the big problem really was what was happening in pockets like Malaysia with the complete clampdown there on account of COVID. Now, once again, with this new variant, are you getting any early signs of such issues cropping up yet again? Because even Europe has been ravaged. What are the signs globally now in terms of production particularly?
Not yet, because, this semiconductor thing, there are very few manufacturers across the world. You require huge economies of scale for this type of production. And I think the larger issue is the capacity constraint faced by the semiconductor makers, because the demand is common with for the chips for cars are common also for semiconductor demand elsewhere in industries like the white goods or mobiles and communication equipment, laptops, etc., which have also gone up. So it's a larger issue, not just a short-term issue. Yes, it was aggravated, you are right, for Maruti Suzuki because of one of our vendors who was in Malaysia, got affected by the COVID lockdown. But I think there is a larger issue beyond these short-term issues which we are seeing currently.
Right. Mr. Srivastava, good morning. Always a pleasure having you here. Prashant this side.
Good morning. Yes, Prashant, good morning.
Have you consciously allocated more volumes for exports as compared to allocation for the domestic market? And if you've done so, why is that? Is that a product considerations with regards to product mix or something else?
No, it's not like that. Actually, there is a standard way of allocation of production that we follow. It's a very fair distribution that we follow. But yes, the products which are exported in different countries could be different from the specs of the products which we are producing in India. So it's possible that the different models are affected in different ways by the chip shortage. And that has been the basis of the higher allocation for exports. And I think you are commenting on the fact that exports have already crossed 147,000 this year, which has been it has been the highest ever, in a year. In the whole year, actually, in 2009-10, we did about 147,000. So in 8 months, we could cross that number. But as far as your question of allocation is concerned, It largely depends on the model, which models are being exported to which countries.
Okay. Coming back to the demand picture, Mr. Srivastava, since you said that inquiries have picked up, I wanted to ask you on two fronts. One, the mini and compact car segment has been hit very hard in November. It's down 25%. Just trying to understand if the entry-level segment demand has come back, because in other pockets, like say two-wheelers, for example, entry-level is hit very hard. And a sort of similar question, because rural demand has gotten hit, and that's where a large chunk of entry-level, sales goes through. Is there a big dip over there?
No, not really. I think if you go by the single month's figure of November, you are probably commenting on the sale of Alto and Espresso, which is the mini car segment. So there was a drop in November this year compared with last year. So this year we did about 17,500 units against 22,500 last year. But if you look at the cumulative figure, which is April to November, which is a slightly better indicator of the underlying demand, there has been a good growth in this in this segment. So against 127,500 in the April-November period last year, this year we have touched almost about 142,000. So I think there is, contrary to what is being thought, the demand for in the rural sector has actually been stronger for us. And today, 43% of our total sales comes from the rural areas. The growth in rural areas has been higher than in urban areas this year. And I think the reason is, and going forward, we do believe that it will continue, because the Rabi sowing has been pretty good. Kharif crop has been great, and now that the procurement season is on, with the good MSPs which have been fixed, I think there would be good cash flows in the rural areas, and that's reflected in car sales. You're probably referring to the two-wheeler sale going down in the in this thing, and I think that has got. And although I'm not an expert on the two-wheeler at all, but I have been studying that closely, and I think that's largely because the running cost of that sector is very, very sensitive to running cost, and fuel prices going up dramatically would have affected especially that segment much more than probably the car sector.
No, the reason I'm asking, Mr. Srivastava, is because the feedback that I get is that it's not only a supply problem, even demand is getting hit quite a bit. Now, if you look at your own numbers, you talked about production ramping up to 85% of normal in November from 60% in October, right? So you're ramping up production, but even then the sales have been flat month on month. So are we also facing a demand problem, is what I'm asking?
No, not really. So because the demand problem obviously is reflected in the pending bookings that we have. So we have about 250,000 pending bookings. So that is the reason why whatever was produced has been dispatched. And in fact, the inventory at the dealerships today is just about a week, whereas normally it is about 4 weeks of inventory that the dealerships carry. And the dealership and the inventory in the factory is almost nil. So there is no scope left for more vehicles to be dispatched or retailed unless we have a higher production levels.
Mr. Srivastava, on margins, and that largely depends on input prices. What have you seen in the quarter so far?
So as far as the auto industry is concerned, there is a lag in the commodity prices and what we get. There's about a quarter's lag in the cost for the procurement. Yes, we have had a very high commodity price increases, as you know, over the last year, be it steel or copper or aluminium or precious metals, which are used in the catalyzers for BS6 vehicles. They have all gone up dramatically. Steel, which was 38 rupees a kg, had gone up to 70. It has come down a little bit. So also copper, which was $5,200 a ton, going up to $10,300 a ton. We have seen increases in aluminium, also in the precious metals, which is very important because for catalyzers use up a lot more precious metals now than they used to in the past when BS4 vehicles were there. Their rhodium, for example, went up from 16,000 rupee a gram to almost 63,000 rupee a gram. Story is similar for palladium. So we do expect, we had expected a little bit of softening. It hasn't happened. Just a little bit in the precious metals. But I think the cost pressures are huge. And you are right, we haven't passed on the entire cost increases to the consumers yet. although we have had 3 price increases in January of about 1.4%, in April of about 1.6%, in September of about 1.9%, but that hasn't been enough. And we are, of course, very conscious not to compromise the demand. And therefore, we are walking that really fine line, looking at the top line as well as the bottom line.
So no price increases, right?
We are very closely watching the situation. As I said, there is a big pressure.
Right.
There is a big pressure, and we will take a decision on that very shortly in a few days' time.
All right, Mr. Srivastava, thanks so much for joining us, and you gave us some really important takeaways. You said that, growth in the rural areas is quite strong for passenger vehicle makers, which means that the two-wheeler sector is getting hit very hard in the rural areas. Could it be company-specific? Could it be Hero Moto-specific? Only time will tell, but there's definitely a problem brewing in the two-wheeler space because the others are not facing it, the folks who have an exposure to the rural market. Let's do one thing. Let's take a quick break on that note. Up next, we will